G'day Exile, welcome back to the second half, the post-stall cast. For you, I'm Ziggy D, joined once again by Mathel, Rise QT, and Nugi. And we're going to have a bit of a chat about what we've seen so far, and there is a lot to go over. While we distract you while we wait for the next upcoming segment, which will be Kriparian interviewing Jonathan about Path of Exile 2. So until then, though, let's have a little bit of a chat about some of the things we've seen. Why don't we kick things off with the separation of Path of Exile 1 and 2 into separate games, and what that means. What do you guys have any thoughts about that, Mathel?
Yeah, apparently they didn't own enough of my soul. So, like, instead of just, you know, playing as much as you want of Path of Exile League, a few weeks here or there, you know, maybe half of it, something like that, and then maybe do some other things. Instead, you're pretty much locked in a cycle of playing both versions now with new launches continuously, and I'm just going to be doing that basically for the rest of my life. So that's the big shock and twist.
La liga ya sabe cuándo es, el 18 de agosto.
Exile 2 looked amazing, and yeah, nothing short of what I expected.
Awesome. Rise?
Porque ya está anunciada.
I gotta say, I was thinking that that's the right path for Path of Exile. And I mentioned it to a couple people, and they were all going, nah, no, there's no way. They're not doing that. Even developers were like, we're not telling you anything. Turns out, they're doing it. So, like Mathel said, I think there's plenty to be played, and it's going to be for a long time. I think they have a very nice schedule with those last couple weeks leading into another PoE 1 or PoE 2 expansion. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Nugi?
Yeah, no, I agree. Pretty exciting. I'm not sure. Like, you're still getting PoE 1 and 2 at the same time, just in PoE 2 and all upgraded. So it's not we're gonna have this weird split between 1 and 2. You're just getting it all in one package with enough content to, like, just. Yeah.
Oh.
I think them separating the games the way they are does answer a lot of questions about like how certain PoE 1 things might have changed over to the new system, PoE 2 and things like that. So I kind of expected that this isn't super unexpected, but what was really unexpected for me was the fact that they're keeping up with Path of Exile 1 expansions as well, like this split cycle. Like, I did not expect that in a million years.
I don't think anyone did.
Yeah, I thought PoE 1 was done, you know, just go legacy and you could go back and play the old content if you wanted to, but I didn't realize there was going to be new updates to that. That's good. That's a lot of work for them. They're basically going to be splitting their office into 2 teams at that point and continuing development of both games.
And surely Path of Exile 1 only gets bigger and better from here as well, because for the past few years they've been working like largely on Path of Exile 2, and
vamos a mirar aquí un momento ahora
PoE 1 leagues and all that. They've still been good.
La página de la nueva liga.
Like now, if they're working on them in tandem, there's probably a large subsection of their team on Path of Exile 1 that maybe came back and kept, doing.
Las silver coins vuelven, como podéis ver.
I'm super curious what this means for the long term. Like, do the games get to steer in different directions? Does Path of Exile 2 get to develop in one way, where Path of Exile 1 continues in a different trend? Maybe Path of Exile 1 keeps that much faster gameplay. Maybe PoE 2 changes this more combo-focused gameplay, a bit more interactive, and they might grow apart separately over time potentially, or maybe borrow from each other as well. Well, it could happen there, right?
Yeah, that's a real possibility, because I remember seeing those trailers and thinking that's going to be hard, like especially with the monk, that's going to be hard to fit into PoE 1, and I mentioned that before, and it turns out, well, they don't got to do it. And yeah, there's been a lot of talk definitely about some of the trailers that they've shown in the past, with the gameplay being more methodical, slower, more tactical, and PoE 1, let's be real, it's not exactly like that anymore. So yeah, I think there's going to be plenty for each type of player, but it's nice to have that opportunity to be able, just like with different games, just try something maybe with a little bit different pace, but at the same time, we don't really know.
Yeah, let's talk about that gameplay, like just in an overall sense, the gameplay of Path of Exile 2, what it looked like, what are you guys' impressions of it? What are your first thoughts on that, Mathel?
I mean, I love how crisp everything looked. For like the ice skills, the lightning, the world that they, the aesthetics, exactly. The world they built there, and just seeing the new classes doing their new things, like it was exactly what I was hoping to see.
Hay reservation efficiency en los status.
Sometimes I think a bit slower than I would have liked, but that's just kind of how it is early on, and then especially during a demo. Yeah, you should have noticed that.
Claro, ya está en Ancestral.
Nothing was like supported too much. There was a lot of extra extra passives unused.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you still want to be able to have your Path of Exile zoom and get through it pretty quick if you really want to. I'm sure we'll get that later on, but yeah, it looked just crisp.
Yeah, I anticipate that players will be playing that same content after a little while.
Entra rápido de que crashe.
Better links, better gear, better builds, and so on. For demonstration purposes, obviously slowed down quite a bit, but it does give you an idea of what they're going for there. And showing that, I think, does allow for us to see a little bit of the idea of like, okay, so maybe we have the fast encounters, players really crushing stuff really quickly, but then maybe like at endgame, certain bosses or certain bosses where you're leveling have those longer encounters, and this is what Path of Exile can do with that situation. Here's much more dynamic gameplay. We did see very different styles of gameplay too, from the monk and from the sorceress. One felt like a fighting game, and then the other one had like meta skills and like a bit more like combination between those different spells and things like that. So how do you guys feel about that? Do you like prefer one over the other, or?
I think just having the dodge available.
Yeah.
Every class without a cooldown.
That's big.
Is crazy.
It didn't have a cooldown,
Hostia, 70% less damage en el Vengeance Scale.
And I saw some animation canceling with that too.
Yep.
That is very, very cool. I think that's much better. Hopefully it's going to be much better than what it is in current Path of Exile with some of the animation canceling. But yeah, absolutely. I think the Monk, pretty crisp. I think that was looking pretty good. The repositioning, the constant mobility, that's the sort of classes that I enjoy. So really looking forward to that.
I think the going to the PoE2 and slowing it down a bit, and all the uniqueness of all the different kit with the weapon swapping and all that, I think you're going to be able to live more in a certain fantasy in PoE2 than you've been able to be. Like, there's going to be more of a distinct feel to everything. Where even as like in PoE1, you had flame dash on every warrior, like on every marauder, duelist, everything. But like you were a spellcaster, but also a fighter. It's like, so I think like they can really lean into like the uniqueness of every character, and I think that's going to feel real good.
Yeah, and then the weapon swapping as well. They haven't really specified what you can and can't do with that. They were talking a little bit about the different passives for like fire and lightning, but then can you do that with the types of melee weapons and switching that out? Like, that looks like a system that's got a lot of opportunity and probably going to be pretty tricky to develop around sooner or later.
That's what I figured. Looking at the weapon swapping, I thought it's
increíble
to be able to pick up like several different weapons while you're playing and actually spec into like a couple instead of just going for generic things and hoping that eventually you can commit to a weapon. This way you might at least be able to branch out into two different things, actually spec two different things, and then make a full choice later down the line. But yeah, I think it's going to have a big impact on melee.
Verdad, no han explicado nada de lo del oro.
Yeah, this all kind of like weaves into what you were talking about of things becoming a lot more distinct. Like you can have more distinctive styles between each class, but also distinctive styles within that class where you've got a character that's swapping between two weapon types for melee or different staves or whatever for different caster styles, and that weapon swapping system was.
A ver, Tukohama War Herald, ¿dónde está?
They'd be doing something with the skill system, so they kept what they had shown previously with the skill system menu where you can drop your skills in and drop your supports in.
Pero no sé qué, Ancestral Fist of War.
But then also adding to that and expanding that with this weapon swapping system that actually, like, it looks like it works, right? That's the thing that struck me about is like, as the current weapon swapping system.
No hay ningún slam, ¿no? Que sea hit también.
Yeah, no one really wants to do it. There's like an occasional build that takes advantage of it for the most part, but mostly we're leveling offhanded gems, right? It's not very interesting.
What about the gems, though?
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that they're in the, you can just pick them. You get the uncut, the curse.
Oh, yeah, the uncut gem.
Oh, yeah.
That was nice, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That might be ruthless influence, because you can do that.
Right.
But you're so limited. While here, you can really mess around with it a lot. It's a really nice system, especially since there seems to be even more skills, and they're going to keep introducing like they have been every league. Right now, they're focusing on support skills, but I would imagine those abilities are also going to come into play eventually, so it's just growing.
Well, some of our predictions were about shortening that time from like finding something cool to using it, and that system being able to get a new gem in the field without going back to town works for that, right? You find a cool new weapon, it's got a fire, it's a staff with like some fire skill or meta skill built into it that's going to work really cool with this thing. You pick up your cut gem that you got in your inventory and cut it up into something that's going to work with that, and then you change your build on the fly. And maybe it's also working alongside and synergizing, but different to your currently existing build and your other weapon swap.
Just having the icon on the UI, and you can kind of figure out what the different things are and what your style is, versus, let's say you're in PoE1, you go to a vendor, and all you're faced with is a row of different shaped stone, and you don't really know what to do with it. So I think that's really going to just open up like just your creativity on the fly.
Yeah, absolutely.
A
Definitely.
whole new level of speed running as well.
Oh yeah.
You don't have to go back to town.
Yeah, well, Rise and me doing the race tomorrow, and that'll be kind of like sealing off the PoE1 era of racing somewhat. I'm super interested to see what happens with PoE2, like competitive play in racing. Like there's so much more that people can interact with there as well. I imagine weapon swapping setups being set up on the fly and cut gems being cut in the field.
Oh wow, yeah, I think the skill ceilings just opened up quite a lot.
Going right up.
Yeah, for sure, because that was a big limit for a lot of classes in the past for racing. For instance, Duelist, right? It needs that access to all those different weapons, and wasn't the case, but it will be now.
Yeah, so much more dynamic and distinctive gameplay there, but we also saw a bunch of new classes, like more classes. What? There's already so many classes in this game, and then like with their ascendancies as well, like splitting that into so many more classes. So now, we got a mercenary, a warrior,
Huntress,
Druid,
sorceress, and druid. Yeah.
druid. Yeah, there we go.
I'm shocked they didn't show the druid. Maybe
And that's it. And they didn't get rid of any. I thought they were getting rid of some. Like I thought Templar was gone. I thought Templar was being replaced by monk.
Oh, really?
But they're all still there. It's like adding another class for each of the hybrids.
But they haven't talked about ascendancies, right?
Well, they did
No.
Exilecon.
Yeah,
and
but
they did touch on it.
No
Right, but they
relation
didn't
anymore.
give us the info on it. No.
Yeah, not yet. I'm guessing in one of the later panels we'll start to touch on some of breaking those down a little bit. But yeah, it seems like their intent.
Me encanta como simplemente han dejado el oro ahí, no han dicho absolutamente nada de él.
Yeah, actually, if you play a monk, it's going to have a much bigger impact on even your early game, not just the ascendancy choices you'll have access to, but also like the sort of skills that you have available and the play style. Much more than just an aesthetic.
And even the party play looked a lot more interesting. It seemed like they were really positioning themselves around each other, and it worked really well, I thought, with some of the more high mobility monk gameplay, and then the sorcerers being more in the back, more bigger cast times and bigger cooldowns, but then those big nukes. Really, when I was watching the boss fights, it was kind of, I was going to cheer Neon on, like, do some damage. He wasn't doing anything, and Octavia was just blasting over and over, so having an opportunity to just go for those big hits and make it work is such a cool concept.
I'm really glad they showed the co-op gameplay because, like you said,
El Ice Comet me encanta, tío.
The second boss fight where one player was like really distracting and stuff like that. It looked much more like engaging than current multiplayer Path of Exile. And hard to put my finger exactly why, but I think one of the things was the new crowd control system they showed off, which is brilliant. It builds up crowd control over time. So like you hit them with things that freeze, it builds the freeze up until you get an actual substantial freeze or stun on a boss. We saw big stuns on those bosses. So instead of just like you build a stun character and you get like lots of little stuns, maybe you make a crazy character and you can stun lock or something, but most of the time the bosses are immune to this stuff or it just doesn't work.
They've hidden freezes, so it's like you've technically frozen them, but you haven't, and it's there for the sake of numbers, really.
Yeah, but now you're actually like building up to something, and when it happens, it's significant. That's when you're like, you and your party members can start blasting.
Yeah, you could see that they were interrupting some of the mechanics. You could also see that when it came to the gameplay, it wasn't as chaotic as usual PoE1 gameplay. They were like stacking up for bigger mechanics and really synergizing well together.
Yeah, we saw, and like with the skills that, for example, the Glacial Cascade, the final hit dealing extra damage on the freeze, like you got your monk getting the freezes off, or the spellcaster getting the freezes off, and then synergizing skills across classes as well. There, where someone triggers that big freeze and someone else gets a big damage play off it.
And then have all the new boss fights as well for every single zone, built in mind with the fact that we have the ailment system. So you're probably supposed to engage with them differently now as well. It's not just hit them a lot and like move once.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest concerns at the last Exilecon for me, that how do you really build this from the ground up to make it feel like it's not just a continuation of Path of Exile 1 and just another expansion, because GG's just so good at releasing these expansions over and over, and you kind of grow accustomed to it. And I know that some other games have been doing that, where they release basically an additional campaign, and it hasn't quite hit the mark. So I think the final decision on, well, possibly, I'm assuming, the final decision on PoE2 being a separate game is going to be really cool.
I think we saw much more different boss design than what we've seen in the past as well.
Oh, yeah.
It was like, there wasn't just like a bunch of auto attack spam like you get with current bosses. There were much more big abilities per boss battle that we saw there. And they felt tighter, like they were happening end to end. Like there was much less place for the exiles to maneuver. So those crowd control mechanics have a chance to play a real large role there, but also the dodge roll. I feel like that shapes the combat in some way.
I mean, most of the mechanics looked pretty lethal. Like, you really do have to get out of the way. When we saw Neon die that first time, you could really notice, and just the actual fear that he had for every attack on that second time after that. He'd, like, there's just one pretty generic sweep, and you know you could be a little bit away from it. I saw him run right to the end of the back just to make sure he's not getting hit, and almost every single attack that did hit him, if it combos a little bit, he's going to die, and it made for some tense moments.
They really did him dirty. No unwavering stance. He kept getting stunned over and over. I'm like, whoa, they have no mercy for this guy.
They rehearsed that segment like a few dozen times as well, and you can tell the death wasn't planned. I'm glad we got to see the death.
They actually mentioned that they did about 20 of those runs, and he died on maybe the last of those runs, and then went, oh no, is that is it going to happen again? So then turns out like twice in a row, basically.
Yeah.
So could not have gone worse, but that's what you want to see. Yeah,
started to get in his own head, I think, and was getting a little bit caught out by some of those abilities there. But yeah, that looked pretty brutal. But also,
mini boss ese
like what we said, probably you'll be a little faster in terms of actual gameplay with the players once your skills are better supported and things like that. But it's going to be like still fast and lethal gameplay. And I know that's something people will be concerned about. A lot of people see this like skill combos and a lot of these things, and they're like, I don't know if that's the Path of Exile I want, because a lot of people do like the really fast-paced Path of Exile, but it still seems like it's very fast-paced gameplay there.
But they do have the option now to go back to PoE. If they really just love everything that PoE1 had to offer, it's still there. Nobody can go and say, hey, but it used to be this in the old days. Well, it's right there you could just go and play it. And a lot of people want that as well. I mean, you see World of Warcraft expanding and expanding over years, but then there's a core style of play that they would really love, and that's why we have, you know, all the like the classic games now coming out as well. And that's essentially what, I mean, I think that's pretty clever.
Lo que acaba de decir Nugi es verdad.
Just giving us the classic experience.
La cadencia.
Yeah, we don't have to demand in 10 years' time. Like, we want classic. They're like,
we're spoiled.
You think you do, but you don't.
That's it. We're bringing desync back.
I'm glad we're not going back to that classic.
A little too classic for everyone's taste.
It's like classic, but continuing to evolve. My mind's still blown about that whole announcement. But
Mira, van a ver ligas nuevas.
So, like, I heard people like in the crowd being like, "Tell us why have you told us this?" That was gold. Did everyone?
Gold, the gold was crazy.
Yeah, so they didn't actually touch on it, did they?
No.
No, simplemente la han dejado ahí.
It was like literally the first thing that comes up because they kill the first monkey and it drops some gold or something.
The whole crowd goes, ooh.
They're like, what?
Well, that might be a spoiler for people at home, but on the cards that we got at Exilecon, the currency orbs, they look different.
Very different.
Oh, really?
Very different.
Yeah.
Well, you've seen currency orbs?
Oh, hell yeah. I have like 2 transmutes.
Are they not just they're not just more detailed? They actually look...
No. They're like
look very, very different.
The transmute looks like an Exalted Orb almost.
Yeah, like, I mean, story-wise, I can kind of justify this idea because we had... PoE1 was very much like you were in a barter economy because everyone was just in survival mode on Rayclass, right? They're all exiles. They're all just like bartering useful items with each other. That's why the economy was built around that concept. So story-wise, like now, it seems like they're trying to rebuild. They're trying to make us, like, this character seems to be, that we saw some hints of, seems to be making some sort of society or something like that. So that maybe an actual currency system and actual merchants and things like that.
They gave us so little with that. It was really just like a 20
¿Verdad? Nos han dejado ahí oro.
And they just switched away.
Yeah, so...
Well, they did soft test the gold thing with the Ruthless League little event.
Right.
And I guess it was received well enough, because I think that was probably one of my least complaints of that thing. Like, with gold, yep, that was actually a pretty cool system. Where you can go back into town and purchase just a few basic items. So it wasn't like replacing currency altogether, but it was just an addition that gave you some options for vendors and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, obviously when Path of Exile 1 was first kind of showcased, they came out saying that, you know, we think gold's not a very, very good system. Here's how we want to do it better. So it'll be interesting to hear soon, maybe when they talk about it, hopefully, why they want to move to this system and how it's going to play in Path of Exile and how they're going to, like, address some of those things maybe people don't like about gold. Keeping gold useful, that sort of thing.
I think that's for sure happening. It's so bizarre that they didn't talk about that. Maybe it's one of those things where Chris is like, he missed a slide. I don't know.
Maybe. I mean, there was a lot to talk about, so
yeah,
you could easily skip a few things.
There was a few moments where we were like enjoying the gameplay, and we're just like, come on, tell us the things. Give me some off-the-cuff commentary. Come on. We got a few little moments of that. And speaking of that, there was the new mana reservation system. Instead of reserving our mana now,
Verdad,
you have a
Spirit.
completely separate resource. Spirit, was it?
Yeah.
You build up through getting items, quest rewards, build it up, and it sounds like it'll be improvable through itemization of the passive tree and things like that.
Yeah,
I'm very excited about that.
Plus 10 maximum spirit from a boss kill.
Yeah.
More reservation right there.
Happen, yeah.
But like, as a big fan of the Archmage and mana and all that, are you pretty excited about like being able to use your mana while at the same time being able to have the power of the auras and shit?
Yeah, but they're probably gonna nerf it. Nerf everything.
Doesn't matter. You can now still have determination on the side.
True. That's getting nerfed too.
That's, well,
the determination's not gonna last.
If Crip has his way with the developers, then determination's gone. He's not a fan.
Maybe we'll find out in like 10 minutes or so when he interviews Jonathan.
True.
The way that they said it on stage is like, people are always out of mana. I'm like, yeah. Because that's one of my thing. Definitely, like, the feeling of being out of mana and not being able to cast your skills is
it's not just being out of mana. It's like we're ignoring it as a resource system. Essentially,
you're not using it at all.
Yeah, so like solving it is one thing, and that's part of the game, right? You have a bunch of problems, you try and solve them, and it feels good to finally solve them. Whereas with mana, largely we're ignoring it. We're just like, you know, you reserve as much and then just make sure it's not a thing for you. With this, perhaps it'll, you know, open up a lot more possibilities.
That's parts of what we saw with the Sorcerer's gameplay. The mana seemed like a more significant thing, and it also seems like they're taking, well, they explained it, but they were taking essentially what were archetypes, and they seem to really like putting them on support gems and whatnot. Like, for instance, when we had Forbidden Rite, which takes a portion of your HP and then does a lot of damage. That was really popular for a little bit with totems until it got nerfed. And they seem to have added that on a support gem. So I think that's the right way to go, honestly. It opens up a lot of opportunity, and whenever it does need a buff or a nerf, they can address it as a whole, and that might make it so that the patch notes are even more spicy than they have been up to now.
Excellent stuff. Yeah, we definitely saw like more skills that were like really expensive mana costs, like the meteors, cheaper mana costs, and then free, like the ones granted by items. So that means, that definitely shows I think there's going to be a lot more interaction with mana as a resource. And I think if they get that right, it's going to feel really good. Mana's hard though. Like, a lot of games I think struggle to get it right. They've had a lot of experience now, and I'm very excited to see what they try with the new system. We saw so many things today. Any other standout things?
I mean, for me, it was mostly classes.
El PoE2 viene en unos 2 añitos.
Be some ascendancies and some character models and stuff, and I'm sure almost no one would have thought new classes, because when we first saw Path of Exile 2, it's a very locked-in, distinct platform of our usual classes, and then one of them drops down and you get to play it, and you're like, okay, that's what it is. And they can't possibly expand on that, but then somehow they do, and all of a sudden, like there's also just the shape-shifting thing, right? You thought we're going to get a shapeshift. Nope, entire droid. So that just fulfills the shapeshift fantasy for anyone that wants to go down that route. But yeah, and also the new skills. It said like 100 new skills or something. So like a lot of them are going to be kind of revamps, but I expected a few. I don't like, how can you keep making new skills when it feels like you're already reaching a limit of creativity? But there's just more.
It's so brutal to other games when we saw that, like, the rattling off of the stats, like 700 item types, 1,000 skills, 82 classes. I'm like, oh, how do other games, like, you just can't, right? Because they're taking everything from Path of Exile 1 and moving it forwards. And that's been my big complaint with some other games that have gone from version 1 to version 2. It's like everything else forgotten about, gone, completely erased.
It's kind of also interesting how they said that, I believe the Huntress is the, what was it, pole arms or some
Javelins?
pokey type of
I
weapon.
think
Yeah.
so.
Javelins and stuff.
Yeah, like spears
Spears,
specifically.
javelins,
So it's
Jav,
kinda,
Amazon kind of vibes.
yeah, I wonder if you're gonna be able to have that class be some sort of caster, or if they're really kind of tying it down, because that's very unusual for PoE. I know that they're doing stuff with the attributes, right, where they're splitting up different classes to have different attribute preferences, but to tie a class down to a weapon, pretty unusual in a game that usually had like all the freedom in the world.
I think it gives, if you think about Monk as well, it's all about movement and hitting and getting up close and dodging it out. If you think about, like, what can a spear do? I mean, if you just think about all the different ways, well, you could also pivot around it. You could swing around it. You can...
That's true.
Like, attach it into something and pull yourself through it.
Well, the thing is, too, that with PoE, the gameplay's always been like, if it's melee, it's super melee, but if it's melee, but...
I mean...
The game, well, the way that you would make melee
PoE
work in the past is you just gave it a bunch of AoE. So maybe with...
But PoE 2, you see
the more
the
pokey
Monk,
weapons.
and you're like, it's low life, I dodge, I hit, you know...
I'm just hoping that it's going to be a more mid-range class, essentially.
Sure,
We don't really have that. It's either big AoE or, well, bad.
It definitely looks a lot more dynamic now with like...
Yeah.
With the dashing, and they're
lines,
attaching like a certain movement to every skill, so that you're never like feeling as if you're kind of missing because you've attacked from too far away. So that seemed to be actually a pretty big system as well to make melee refreshing.
I really can't believe the dashing. It's so crazy. Because forever they were like, no, mobility bad, nerf, nerf, nerf. And it was like... they were doing that forever, and I remember one of the most despised patches was when they put even more cooldown on mobility skills. So for them to just completely 180 on that, looking forward to it. And it's also very impressive from just a game point of view, because that's a big jump.
Yeah, it's changing the gameplay around it too, like in a very exciting way, I think. We also had the Path of Exile 1 League announced. I thought that looked so cool, right?
Yeah.
So you predicted the survivors, and that's like a trending genre right now, but auto battle is also kind of a trending genre. So I was like, oh, Methel, you were close, mate.
That was a good call.
I think I was off by maybe a year or so.
One year. Next year, maybe we get
maybe. Or maybe I just gave them the idea, and you know.
Yeah, someone's furiously coding right now.
But yeah, no, that one actually looked. It's pretty big scope of that one. It seemed kind of similar to me of Sanctum, where it's like this separate thing where you interact with slowly and build your own sort of board and gameplay, and then have a big battle.
Yeah, it's like tournament structure.
Yeah, and then start up another one later. But it seemed very kind of like Sanctum in the way you're going to engage with it, but then just a completely different mechanic altogether. And it was kind of more like grounding us, right? So as opposed to going all the way out into space and killing some other bigger things, it's like it's still from our roots, our ancestral roots, and like the history of the game's characters and combat and all that.
All right, you guys have any thoughts?
So, I don't know. So they showed some leaderboard stuff.
Yeah.
Will that be against everyone else? Like, will there just be one? I think there's just going to be one
was
method.
for your own
character your own character?
So that you're like getting higher up through the system and getting further along to higher combat.
I would like to PvP some other people, though.
It would be a good PvP system.
Yeah.
All right, folks, we've been given the wrap-up, though. We're going to be moving over in just a moment to Kriparian interviewing Jonathan, talking about Path of Exile 2, I believe, and I look forward to hearing what we're going to be able to hear about them. Thanks, guys, for joining me for the Stallcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope it kept you occupied while you were waiting through these difficult times for the more interesting content. Happy to be of service. Thanks for watching.